Hi, this is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to answer the question, is Bitcoin a pyramid or Ponzi scheme? If you're interested in Bitcoin, crypto, momentum stocks, or just want to see what I'm trading these days, be sure to hit that subscribe button. So one of the critiques I get a lot when I talk about Bitcoin on my YouTube channel is that it's manipulated, that it's a pyramid scheme, that it's a Ponzi scheme. So I wanted to address that in this video. The name Ponzi scheme comes from Charles Ponzi, who was an Italian-American swindler who gives his name to the Ponzi scheme. And his swindle is very similar and provide the structure for later Ponzi schemes. And this is normally where you promise clients a certain percentage profit, usually a very high profit. In this case, 50% profit within 45 days or 100% profit within 90 days. Now, the way these work is that the later investors in a Ponzi scheme are paid off with new money from new investors. So let's just quickly go through, talk about Ponzi versus pyramid. So as I said, in a Ponzi scheme, you pay profits to early investors with later investors' money. So Bernard Madoff, the Madoff investment scandal is a great example of this. This sort of came unwound during the last financial crisis of 2008. This is one of the biggest, I think it may be the biggest Ponzi scheme in history, multi-billions of dollars. And what Madoff did is he basically promised investors, and a lot of these investors were very smart, wealthy people, institutional investors. He still managed to fool them. He promised them very high returns. And what people liked about his returns, I can't remember what they were, 15, 20% a year or so. Not super crazy. But he never had drawdowns. The returns were very, very constant. And the way he was able to do this is he was able to pay out almost like a dividend or a capital gain to early people using money from new investors. And eventually this thing collapsed. So that's a Ponzi scheme. There's no real economic value being created. You're just shuffling money around. And the other thing about a Ponzi scheme is you need to keep adding more people all the time or it collapses. You need those new investors to pay off the new investors. And another characteristic of a Ponzi scheme is that value and investment returns. In other words, the pricing of the security or of the returns, it's all determined by a centralized entity. So that's a Ponzi scheme. Obviously a criminal enterprise in the US and most countries. Pyramid scheme is often confused with a Ponzi scheme, but it's slightly different. In this case, it's more of a recruitment scheme. So you get paid usually by a centralized entity, a founder or a corporation. You get paid for recruiting more people rather than selling an actual product. Now, there may be an actual product involved, but you know you're in a pyramid scheme if you get paid based more on how many people you recruit rather than your sales to them. So a legal version of this, though sort of questionable, is what's called multi-level marketing. So multi-level marketing can be okay and it can not be okay. It's best to stay away from these schemes. No one usually makes that much money from them except the people at the top. But in MLM or multi-level marketing, it becomes a pyramid scheme at the point at which your compensation is mainly based on how many people you recruit and then you sell to those people. If you're just selling beauty products door to door and getting paid a commission, it's probably not a pyramid scheme. But again, the thing to notice in both of these cases, Ponzi schemes, pyramid schemes, there's always a centralized entity. And there's often the promise of very high returns over a short period of time, and you can be explicitly paid for recruiting people. So we talked about Madoff. He's still in jail, I believe. Great example of a Ponzi scheme that fooled a lot of people. Now, these Ponzi schemes often unwind during financial crises. That's when the tide goes out, as Warren Buffett says, and you can see who's been swimming naked. For this financial crisis of 2020, it remains to be seen who the bad actors are. I suspect it's mostly Main Wall Street and the central banks. So a lot of people, Bitcoin can sound like a pyramid scheme or a Ponzi scheme because a lot of Bitcoiners, myself included, I'm guilty of this on this channel, are often guilty of evangelism, talking people's ears off. If not, I don't encourage people to buy Bitcoin. I just document why I'm buying it. But in this, I think a better analogy than pyramid or Ponzi scheme, and I'm going to go into this in more depth, is the analogy to early iPhone adopters, of which I was one as well. I just couldn't stop talking about it when I got my first iPhone. But I was not telling people about the iPhone because I owned Apple stock, though I did. I was telling people about it because I thought it was really, really cool. And I certainly had no illusion that me telling 10 of my best friends about the iPhone was going to drive up the price of a multi-billion-dollar company like Apple. But often there's this kind of evangelism that surrounds Bitcoin, and that can make people a little bit suspicious. Now, Ponzi schemes will often label themselves as low risk. They'll tell you can make 20% a month, 10% a month, these really huge returns. By contrast, I often mention that on this channel, Bitcoin can definitely go to zero. It can become a failed project. And in fact, I think its ultimate goal is either its ultimate price target is going to be a very high number. If the things that happen, I think are going to happen, it's going to be worth in the millions of dollars per Bitcoin, which I know sounds a little bit crazy. We'll go into that later in this video. But Bitcoin can also go to zero. It's sort of a binary outcome. So, similar to something like Facebook. Facebook was either going to be a complete failure and go to zero, or it was going to take over the complete market for social networks. Now, I want to make it really clear to everyone that I don't get paid by anyone for telling you about Bitcoin. I don't have any sponsors. I don't know what ads YouTube runs on your computer when you watch my videos. I doubt they're crypto or Bitcoin ads. I think YouTube prohibits that. But I'm not paid by anyone. There's no secret cabal of Bitcoin bankers who are paying me. I'm not paid by the hardware wallets that I tell you that I use, like Trezor or Cold Card Wallet. I'm not on anyone's payroll. I'm already independently wealthy, and hopefully going to become even more wealthy due to Bitcoin. And so I'm sort of documenting that journey. And just as when I was telling people about the iPhone in the old days and telling them that I did own Apple stock, I will tell you that I do own as much Bitcoin as I safely can, knowing that it could go to zero. So I don't want to blow up my family's finances by owning it, but I own as much as I conceivably can and still risk it going to zero. A lot of people I talk to, I know, put something like 1 or 2% of their net worth in it, because that way, if it goes up 100x, you've doubled or tripled your net worth, and if it goes to zero, you've lost just 1 to 2%. Again, none of this is investment advice, of course. Now, there are lots of Ponzi schemes in the cryptocurrency universe. And I always make it quite clear in this channel, I'm not interested in any other cryptocurrency at this point, except for Bitcoin. I don't like Ethereum. I don't like Litecoin. I don't like Bitcoin Cash or BSV or some of these forks of Bitcoin. I like Bitcoin, BTC. And as lots of people like to say, Bitcoin is the next Bitcoin. This is where I think you really need to be. Again, not investment advice, of course. A good example of a Ponzi scheme in the crypto area was BitConnect. BitConnect was running these sort of trading robots, and they were promising 1% daily compounded interest. And again, this was all being calculated in a centralized way, but this did turn out to be a Ponzi scheme. And they had their own token, and it crashed once this became apparent. This is very typical of a Ponzi scheme, where you're being promised very high returns over a certain period of time. So 1% daily compounded becomes a small amount of money, becomes a very, very large amount of money quite quickly. Another example would be this Bitcoin Ponzi scheme. I believe this was actually using Bitcoin. Now, that in itself does not disqualify Bitcoin, because as we remember, Bernard Madoff was running a Ponzi scheme using US dollars. And in fact, all the real illegal activity that takes place worldwide, the vast majority of it is conducted using US dollars. So it's not a really good argument against Bitcoin. Obviously, there is illegal activity done using Bitcoin, just as there's illegal activity done using euros and yen and Australian dollars and Canadian dollars, but especially US dollars. So this is another example. I believe this is from India. gain Bitcoin Ponzi scheme. This was basically, they portrayed themselves as miners, I believe. I didn't read this too closely. And then it morphed into an actual Ponzi scheme where they were paying off later investors with, they're paying off early investors with later investors. And again, it's very typical. It's run by a centralized group, and people are being promised a certain monthly return. If you ever see something like this, you got to just run in the opposite direction. If it seems too good to be true, it normally is. Bitcoin may be the one exception to that, as I'll tell you a little bit later in this video. So this is something to really emphasize. Unlike the Madoff investment scandal, unlike some of these other ones, which I'll talk about, other Ponzi schemes like OneCoin, Bitcoin is not controlled by a central entity. It's not controlled by a central corporation. It doesn't have a charismatic founder like Ethereum does, for example. Bitcoin is completely decentralized. We don't know who the founder is. We don't know if he or she or they is still alive or dead, but it runs on its own. It's a network that runs the Bitcoin software. It's completely decentralized. If you want to see a map of it, I'll link to this. This is all the Bitcoin nodes, all the full nodes around the world. This is also what makes it quite difficult. If, for example, the US government wanted to shut down Bitcoin, how is it going to do that? How is it going to invade all these sovereign countries and go out in the middle of Siberia and tell these people to unplug their Bitcoin nodes, or deep in Africa, or in countries, especially countries that are hostile to the US and are not fans of the hegemony of the US dollar regime. So Bitcoin, unlike some of these other scams, it's completely decentralized. These people may have certain philosophical things in common. They may be somewhat libertarian, for example. They may like free markets, but these people don't all know each other. This is not some global conspiracy. Now, the Bitcoin network software, anyone can download it. It's all open source, completely transparent. You can download it. I can download it. You can actually buy a node and run it in your house, or you can just run it on an old computer. So the software is transparent. It's not controlled by some centralized entity. There are developers who work on it and slowly upgrade it, but everything they do is done completely out in the open and remains open source. Now, Bitcoin, the network, also maintains what you might think of as like a banking ledger. This is what the blockchain is, and it basically shows every Bitcoin transaction that's ever occurred. Buyer, sellers, addresses. And if you're running a full node, you can verify this using cryptography. Anyone can download the Bitcoin software and use it to verify both the blockchain, which is the list of all these transactions, as well as whether the Bitcoin they own is actual Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin's pricing is not it's not priced in a centralized manner. So there was a Ponzi scheme called OneCoin that you may have heard about. I'm not going to go too much into this, but basically OneCoin had it was backed by a single corporation. There was one in Bulgaria. It had a couple branches run by absolute crooks. One in Bulgaria, one in Dubai, and OneCoin was always priced by this corporation in a sort of mysterious manner, and you could buy and sell it, though you were mostly just encouraged to get your friends to buy more of it. But the pricing was completely non-transparent. It was centralized. It was run by a central corporation, and there was no insight into the pricing. By contrast, Bitcoin is priced worldwide, wherever buyers and sellers meet to conduct business. So this might be on a crypto exchange like Coinbase or Kraken. It might be at one of their over-the-counter desks. I know some of you have been saying that there's secret, nefarious stuff going on at over-the-counter desks. I can assure you that it's impossible to go to one of these OTC desks and buy a lot of Bitcoin at a below market price and then flip it on the market. It just doesn't work that way. Now, there can be discrepancies in pricing of Bitcoin around the world. So there's no centralized exchange for Bitcoin, and this is why you can have weird things happen, especially in countries that have troubled currencies like Venezuela or Zimbabwe. This is an old article from November 2017, which is when Bitcoin was really getting to its last peak. But